Hey guys, welcome to Amity Tracks. Very excited about this week or this episode and the next episode. We're going to be covering one of my favorite bands, Los Lobos. Before we get started, just an apology ahead of time. I am getting over a nasty upper respiratory infection of some sort. It's pretty much gone, but if my voice gets a little croaky or whatever, that's why. So bear with me. I appreciate it. Los Lobos. Uh, you know, I know a lot of our viewers, we have some younger viewers. A lot of our viewers tend to focus on, some of the older, like 60s and 70s acts. I encourage you guys, even if you're not as familiar with Los Lobos, uh, take these episodes to heart because this is a band that I think a lot of people maybe overlook, don't quite grasp like all the great music that Los Lobos has been responsible for, really from the 80s on. And let's rectify that. Let's talk about Los Lobos. So we're dividing this up into two episodes. Um, in this first episode, I want to start off giving you a little bit of background on the band. I'll try and keep it brief, but they've just got such a great, interesting story. So I'll give you some background and explain kind of because we're going to be ranking their records like we usually do. But explaining what I'm including, what I'm not including in the ranking, and then we'll do kind of the lower half of the rankings in this episode. Next episode, we'll pick it back up, do the upper half of the rankings, and then wrap it up like we usually do, talking about some live albums and compilations and stuff like that. All right. So, Los Lobos, that little old band from East LA. The primary songwriters in Los Lobos, we're talking about David Hidalgo and Louis Perez, met in high school. So they go way back. And I think they met around 1973 in high school. And over the next year or so, kind of put the first iteration of Los Lobos together as a band. And in some ways, Los Lobos is kind of the ultimate Americana band. Um, but Southwest Americana, obviously a strong Latin influence. But I mean, it's funny. You go on Wikipedia and read their entry in Wikipedia. I'll just read this to you because they list like all the, you go to look up a band on Wikipedia. They list all the styles and the genres that they play in. Here's the list that Wikipedia had for Los Lobos: rock and roll, rock, Tex-Mex, country, Zydeco, folk, R&B, blues, blues rock, brown-eyed soul, cumbia, boleros, norteños, tejano, roots rock, heartland rock, country rock, Americana, cow punk. And my response to that is yes, all of that. Los Lobos, they're such great consummate musicians, just span all of these styles and blend them and bring them together with great songwriting, just amazing playing. They are one of the great American bands of the last 40 years. And they actually been together throughout the 70s, but they didn't really start recording until the 80s. But the last 40 years, just one of the great bands. That's why we need to talk about them. They've some of their weapons. They've got two just killer guitar players, Cesar Rosas, and then of course David Hidalgo. David Hidalgo especially is just incredible. Rosas is great, but he's a lot of times he kind of does the blues rock thing, But Hidalgo has a wide variety of styles, and is just one of the great guitar players last 40 years. I think a key to the greatness of Los Lobos in some ways is the fact that they did play together as a band for a long time before they ever got a record contract and started to record. From about 1974 to 1980, they were just kind of this local band in East LA, playing gigs, playing a lot of weddings, backyard parties, whatever gigs and clubs they could get. They were just this local East LA band, just cutting their teeth as a band. And that is so key because before they ever recorded their first major record, um, they've been playing together for almost a decade. They already knew each other musically. They had their chops. They were a band, from the very beginning, which is I think explains a lot of how tight they are, and but also how they can really explore and do all kinds of great improvisations and all that kind of thing. If you ever seen them live, they really stretch out. It's got this funny quote from Louis Perez. He's talking about his early days. He says, "Look, if you were ever married in East LA between 1974 and 1980, we probably played your wedding." I mean, they just did a lot of those gigs, a lot of those gigs. I mean, there's a couple of things that they had sort of self-produced and put out before, but their first major label release was 1984. How Will the Wolf Survive? And that is a decade after they really started playing as a band. 1987, of course, they hit it huge nationally, internationally. Funny enough, with their recordings, their covers of La Bamba and Come On, Let's Go, the Richie Valens songs, that they recorded for the La Bamba soundtrack for the film. It's a great movie, biopic of Richie Valens. And for a long time, like that's how people knew Los Lobos. And I remember at the time just telling people, look, there's a lot more to this band than just La Bamba. There really is. Some of you guys may still think, oh, La Bamba, that was probably their biggest hit, but there's so much more. I mean, it's really 1992 was the key year with Kiko, where they just reached this new level of experimentation. And in a lot of ways, to me, like the rest of their career after Kiko was either sort of reacting to or against Kiko, trying to stay in that experimental vein or get away from it and ground themselves again. And Kiko had this profound effect, I think, on the rest of their career. We'll talk a lot about Kiko. Pretty remarkable record. All right. So let's get into this ranking and listing here. Um, First, briefly, what I'm not including in this ranking. I'm not including Los Lobos, an editor can kind of throw these up here. Los Lobos del Este de Los Angeles. It's 1978, generally considered their debut, but it's basically self-recorded, self-promoted. It's all traditional Hispanic music, or mostly. And it really was kind of their set at the time, what they were playing at weddings and all that kind of thing. I'm not including 1995's Papa's Dream, which was a collection of children's music. I mean, cool, but it's not part of their main discography. I'm not including 2009's Los Lobos Goes Disney, where it's just Disney cover songs. Some fun, creative stuff, but it's just, And I'm not including the Christmas album, Llegó Navidad from 2019. Kind of a nice Christmas album, a variety of sort of Latin Christmas songs, but I usually don't consider Christmas albums part of main discographies. They're kind of side projects. So with that, we got 14 records we are ranking in the Los Lobos rankings. And so today we'll do 14 through 8, and then in the next episode, 7 through 1. All right. Well, let's start with number 14. Well, first of all, Los Lobos doesn't have a bad album. None of them are bad. They're just too good musicians for that. But I do have at 14, and this is the one I don't actually have a physical copy of. Editor can throw this up there too. Their 1983 EP, And a Time to Dance. And you can really hear kind of the roots of what's to come, on this record. Sounds, I think, very much probably like the sets they were playing at events and weddings at the time. And they had finally gotten some major label attention, but the label didn't want to put out a full record, so this was an EP. And it was good. It's fun, but they would improve quite a bit after that. All right, now coming in number 13. Now, one thing, I only have about 3 Los Lobos records on vinyl, and all 3 of those you're going to see in the next episode. So it's mostly CDs. I mean, they were putting, all the 90s and the 2000s was really the CD era. So I have these on CD. Hopefully that doesn't bother you. We're here to talk more about music than format. So there are other channels for format. All right. But I do have 1999's This Time. Okay. This Time from 1999. Now, throughout the 90s, from Kiko on, Kiko was 1992. The rest of the 90s, especially, was, I think, kind of in the shadow of Kiko. I mean, they really tried to keep that experimental vein going, but I mean, lightning like Kiko can only strike once, you know. And there, I think through the '90s they were kind of struggling. There was a little kind of diminishing returns and trying to keep that experimentation going, maybe at the at the cost of some great songs and that kind of thing. I think that's definitely the case here with This Time. There's some good songs on here, but it is sort of buried in this sort of murky, sort of almost purposefully experimental mix. And I think if they just let these songs breathe a little bit better, I think that would have been better. There's some good stuff on here. I think it starts out strong. I like This Time. I like Oh Yeah. I like Viking. There's some good stuff, but yeah, I think it's the weakest of their major records. I think playing all the way through. So, all right, coming in at number 12. Now, 12 and 11, I think, are very similar in sort of my feelings about them. So yeah, what I say about 12 sort of will apply to 11 too a bit. You know, this is another one. This is the only other one we're going to talk about that I don't have an actual copy of. Um, listened to it a lot. I've streamed it a lot, but I don't have it. It's 2015's Gates of Gold. Gates of Gold. Now, this one and the next one I'm going to talk about, they're both good listens. Like I said, these are great musicians, whatever they're doing. Yeah, so while you're listening to them, yeah, this is good. But there's just not a whole lot that sticks with you once you finish the listen, in my view, on this one and the next one I was going to talk about. Now, they both have a couple of really killer songs. I don't want to call it filler, but mixed in with a lot of just sort of good songs that, to me, kind of blend together in style. And that's definitely the case with Gates of Gold. I really like Made to Break Your Heart, the opener. So when it opens with that, pretty encouraging. Song of the Sun and the title track are the other two that really stand out to me. The rest of this does sort of blend together. And I gotta say a similar thing for number 11, which is where I have 2002's Good Morning Azatlan. Um, this, I think this is where they really were trying to sort of break away from this rut I think they had that mini rut they had gotten into in the wake of Kiko. Uh, you can tell this is sort of a conscious effort to just kind of do more straightforward, kind of get back to kind of just straight rock and roll and sort of roots rock. But there's kind of a sameness about a lot of these songs to me. Um, Now, the title track is one of my favorite songs of theirs ever. That song rocks. Yeah, a Good Morning Azatlan is as Aslan, whatever, I can't pronounce it. Is fantastic. And there's some other good songs on here too. But like Gates of Gold, this it does sort of blend together as you're listening to it all the way through, in my view. In my view. Now, number 10 is interesting. Number 10 from 1990. If you're wondering, and it's one that's often overlooked, it's The Neighborhood. If you're wondering what the link was, but how they made that jump between How Will the Wolf Survive, By the Light of the Moon, so that roots rock Americana that they were doing so well in the 80s, and then Kiko, this explosive experimentation in 1990. This is kind of the link. That sort of links the two. You sort of understand the transition a little more listening to this. Now, this still, I'm going to be honest, this still does not prepare you at all for what Kiko was. But at least there is a slight kind of link and journey, between the two styles here. It's it's good. It comes in a little long at 13 tracks to me. They had trimmed maybe 3 or so and made it a tighter 10-track album. I think that would have been better. But there's some great songs and standouts here. Down by the Riverbed, the opener, which does feature some kind of experimental percussion, especially. That again, you would hear this kind of stuff on Kiko. Angel Dance, beautiful song. Take My Hand, Be Still. To me, kind of the quieter songs are kind of some of the standouts to me on this. All right, number 9. It's a very interesting record. It's where they wanted to sort of revisit some of the traditional, Mexican style music. So it's got like traditional Mexican mariachi, some Tex-Mex, Tejano, conjunto, other Mexican folk styles. It's got one of the coolest album covers ever, talking about La Pistola y el Corazón from 1988. This was interesting. This was after they had broken big, with By the Light of the Moon and all their La Bamba success. It's kind of bold move, I think, to then say, hey, let's do this sort of traditional Mexican folk record. And I don't speak much Spanish. I speak a little, so I can understand a little, but it doesn't matter that much. This is just beautiful music, sung and performed beautifully, mostly on traditional instruments. So the cool thing about these guys, they're all multi-instrumentalists. So yeah, they can play traditional, bass, drums, guitars, and all that stuff, but they also, can play the accordion and all of these traditional, acoustic Mexican style instruments, and they just do a beautiful job on here. This is just a gorgeous record of kind of Mexican folk styles. All these different styles, and some of them sort of cross the border, like Tejano and stuff like that, but some of them more traditional Mexican folk. Just a beautiful record, stands apart. Although on almost every one of their records, they throw in a couple of Spanish songs and these different styles. But this is a whole record of that, and so it's kind of interesting. It's cool. All right, the final record in today's part in the countdown for today at number 8, I have 1997's Colossal Head. 1997's Colossal Head. Now, this was the first real follow up to Kiko, because they had taken a few years and done some side projects, like the Latin Playboys stuff, that Hidalgo and Perez were working on, where they took the Kiko experimentation to real extremes. That Latin Playboy side projects. Did some soundtrack work, some great soundtrack work. They did the mariachi stuff on the Desperado soundtrack, which is great. So I think this record is unfairly forgotten, because yes, it's in the shadow of Kiko, and no, it's not Kiko, but I think they really do, at least here, uh, sort of continue in some interesting creative ways inspired by Kiko. Revolution is a great opener. Mossy Moss rocks. There's just a really Life is Good is really groovy. Little Japan is an interesting song. Buddy Ebsen Loves the Nighttime. That really woozy closer is interesting. I think this is a good, interesting song where they're still taking that Kiko experimentation, maybe dialing it back a little bit, but it's still all over the place on here. This is a sleeper. Maybe if you maybe one you missed in their discography, it's worth checking out. Well, all right, that's the end of part 1 of Los Lobos. So next episode will be part 2. We'll wrap it up. We will do number 7 through 1 in the rankings, and then wrap things up with talk about live albums, because they're a substantial live band, and talk about some worthwhile compilations that are out there, that type of thing. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Let's get the conversation started in the comments. What are your thoughts on Los Lobos? How do you like the rankings so far? Let's talk Los Lobos. Please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't. That really helps us out. Hit the like button, on the videos. Share the videos. Hit the bell for notifications. All the usual stuff. And we'll see you next time on Amity Tracks with the conclusion of Los Lobos week.